Many Charlestonians on social media turn to hashtag CHSWX for the latest on Charleston weather. In this edition of Quintin's Close-Ups, I sit down with the founder of hashtag CHSWX, Jared Smith, one-on-one. And be sure to download the free Quintin's Close-Ups app in your Apple or Google Play stores. Well, Jared, it is so good to see you.
Same, man. This is awesome.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
God, it's been what, 48 hours since Irma came to Charleston with the storm surge? What is it like to be you?
Well, let's just say that if I had gotten on a plane yesterday, they would have asked me to check the bags underneath my eyes. It's a little, it's a bit of a whirlwind sometimes, balancing normal life and weather life. But it's a lot of fun, you know. Never a dull moment, and you know, it's sometimes you just have to let the adrenaline take over and do its thing. And yeah, it was quite a ride, to put it mildly. I was you know, very concerned for a lot of people. It was quite a harrowing situation, in some ways worse than Matthew. And I'm just glad we got through it reasonably okay.
Let me take you to a headline from the Weather Network, and they actually posted this on Twitter, I guess, a couple of days ago.
Yeah.
It reads this: Charleston hit by major flooding as Irma passes through. If you were to rewrite that headline, what would you add to that?
I think they got it. I think that the wind damage was a little underplayed. I think that the wind impacts, you know, we wanted to highlight flooding. The message that was clear from Irma is that flooding was going to be the most widespread concern. That was the language the Weather Service was hitting on. You know, traditional news outlets, my outlet certainly. But I think that what got lost in this is that because the center of the storm was so far away, people weren't thinking about the wind impacts as much. Everyone was so fixated on the wind impacts when it looked like we were going to take a direct hit a couple days before, and then the track shifted.
Right.
And everybody was like, oh, the cone is so far away from here. And I was like, and it's not just that. And so I think the thing that I would add to that is, you know, it's water and wind impacts. We had several reports of wind damage, many trees down, and you know, that's all that damage is still being surveyed. And also the beaches.
Right.
If you look at the Folly Beach and Isle of Palms are completely chewed up.
Right.
It's really sad.
Yes.
Washout was you know, pushed close to the road. You know, Edisto Beach took another wallop just like Matthew did.
Yeah.
Gave them sand right over Palmetto Boulevard again down there. And so I think the flooding was a big story, certainly a big story, but the beach impacts and the wind impacts, way up there, for sure.
And I was looking at this graphic from Channel 4. It says possible scenarios, that is, for Hurricane Irma. Heavy rain, isolated tornadoes, rain, wind, beach erosion. We basically got all that.
Got it all, absolutely. No, and I will say this, is that for all of the uncertainty that was in that forecast, this was an extremely well forecast storm. I think that, you know, the warning process certainly worked. Working with the National Weather Service and working with, you know, again, and collaborating with broadcast media and everybody, I think that the right word did get out. That surge was going to be the chief concern. Winds were certainly a concern. Isolated tornadoes were certainly a factor.
Right.
We'll see to what extent that they were actually a factor as the Weather Service completes their storm surveys. But you know, the forecast was dead on, and kudos to, you know, area meteorologists for, you know, for one, making that forecast, but two, communicating it very effectively.
And we thank you as well.
Absolutely.
And we got to talk about that big picture. What was it? 92.1 for the tides.
9.92 in the harbor. That was number 3 all time. Surpassed Matthew. Matthew was 9.28 feet. Irma was 9.92. The 1940 hurricane and Hugo were the only two that were larger. And we actually got lucky that it didn't go past 10 feet. There were signs in the surge guidance for days that we could have seen 10 to 12 feet, that we could have challenged Hugo. And the difference between Irma and Matthew is that we did get the peak surge at high tide. Still waiting on some final numbers from the Weather Service, but it looks like it was close to a 5-foot storm surge, which, considering how far the center was from here, is extremely impressive. And so, yeah, I mean, that tide, you know, again, and I wrote in my Medium articles and with the Post and Courier to say that, you know, you've never seen tides like this before.
Right.
I've also gotten to use that line 2 years in a row now. So with the 2015 flood event, with Matthew, and now with Irma. I'm hoping the third time is the charm and we can just be done with that line for a little while. But I think we all got a really good sense of what could happen, you know, if it was certainly that worst case scenario came to pass.
That brought me to an interesting point. Is this a new normal for us?
I hope not. But the NOAA, you know, I was poking around some of the data and you know, and again, I mean, it's pretty clear the sea levels are on the rise, and you know, the number of flood days, we had record most number of coastal flood days last year. I don't remember the exact number off the top of my head, but it was in the 50s or 60s.
Wow.
That's a lot of saltwater flood days. Clear air flood days. This is not days where we have the rain coinciding with high tide, you know, which is obviously the worst case scenario for Charleston. You get saltwater inundation, freshwater inundation for 24, 36 hours in some of those scenarios. But this is just tidal flooding. This is just regular, you know, tides over 7 feet in the harbor, it's going to flood. And sometimes, you know, those can be, you know, we can also get those situations when we get a storm like an Irma or a Matthew, because, you know, it's going to take some time for that water level to flush out. There still could be a couple instances this week where we have saltwater flooding just because of residual effects. And you know, after the 2015 floods, we had a secondary coastal flood event that had tides that were higher than the actual event, the first event. So, you know, as there was a lot of river runoff and elevated tides from that, there are rivers in flood. So we'll have to watch those closely. Maybe not to the extent that, of freshwater flooding like we had in the last two events. Irma fortunately got in and got out relatively quickly, but not before dropping 8 inches of rain on us.
And I want to take you to Mount Pleasant because Mutual News said this a couple of, I guess, hours ago. It says this: the high water mark at Shem Creek Fuel Dock was 8 inches higher with Hurricane Irma than it was during Hurricane Matthew last year. What does those 8 inches tell you?
Well, there's a couple things. Is that with Hurricane Matthew, one of the big difference between Irma and Matthew, and one of the ways that I was communicating this a little bit was that Irma is Matthew's angrier younger sister. In that, you know, the tracks ended up not being similar, and which I'm not sure if that would have really made a big difference. In fact, if anything, if Irma had tracked along our coast as Matthew did, you know, hopefully as a weaker storm, obviously, that might have been more beneficial for us. With Matthew, we did have that 6-foot storm surge, but there were two key differences. One, that peak of that storm surge coincided with low tide. That was a big difference. Yes, we had a 9.28 foot tide in the harbor, but the peak of the surge came afterward. The second part is that as Matthew's backside of the storm wrapped around as the storm moved to our northeast, we got the backside offshore winds, and that helped to blow out all of the floodwater that had built up in White Point Gardens on the beaches and everything. And so that helped to blow that out before it got too crazy. With Irma, we did not get the benefit of the backside of the storm, and so we did not get the benefit of the blowout that happened with the storm surge there. So again, we had very extended residence time of, you know, of the saltwater inundation. As for those 8 inches that they saw at Shem Creek, at the high water mark there, I completely believe it, because again, we had the peak of storm surge coincide with a high tide that had lingering astronomical influences. We just had a full moon a few days ago, and that tide was predicted at 6.1 feet. And so when you add 4 feet to that, you know, that gets interesting. A preliminary look at the data shows that we may have missed the worst possible timing to keep us below 10 feet, but it was close. Too thin of a margin to deal with. So to hear that, you know, Shem Creek had a high water mark that was 8 inches higher than Matthew, that's not at all surprising to me. And in fact, that's right in line with what I would have expected.
A lot of people don't expect Fort Sumter right now. I believe that's still
Yeah. I mean, I think from what I understand, they're still underwater.
Right. Yeah.
And again, they did not have the benefit of the blowout. It's all drainage happening here, and eventually the winds will get a little more offshore later this week. But yeah, I mean, there's no benefit of the strong blowout winds that we had with Matthew.
And obviously now that the talk of science and politics are coming into it.
Absolutely.
What is the future of Charleston and Weber in your mind?
Well, I think what we've got to do is we've got to make we need to have a real hard and frank conversation about how we're developing here.
Okay.
Building on marsh and wetlands, if you look, we're creating our own disasters, as I had seen it written so eloquently recently. Forget where, unfortunately. They deserve a lot of credit for that, because we are engineering our own disasters. We got very lucky with her, and I'll say that, even saying that Matthew was a much more forgiving hit. And that we got to look very closely about how much we're developing. How much marsh and wetland that we're developing, because these are places that can soak this up, and the water has nowhere to go. We have to work to be more resilient as a community. I participated in May in the Enough Pie Awakening 5 high tide event.
Right.
And it was phenomenal, and it opened my eyes to a lot of things. And I know that the city is looking at these things, and that's really good. But I think that we've got to start putting the pressure on to say, is there a smarter way to go about this? Is there a way that we can go about this that helps put back into the natural habitat that is more conducive to just naturally letting this work out? Because what's eventually going to happen is that nature is going to win. We will, we can build, but as people trying to re-nourish Isle of Palms and Folly Beach know all too well, nature is going to win. Nature has other plans, and so we just need to be careful and be resilient against these, against these forces. And with sea levels rising, I don't think, regardless of whether one believes that humans are contributing to climate change or not, I think you can separate that from the raw data that says that the sea levels are going up. And so we've got to plan for that, and we've got to make sure that we are doing everything that we can to build a more resilient and sustainable community. Whether it be through, encouraging, just planting more green spaces, making sure that environmental resilience is built into, new projects. I'm not necessarily going as far to say that there should be a moratorium on all building. In Charleston, we're in an economic boom, and rightfully so. This is a phenomenal place to live. But we need to make sure that developers and those planning these projects are looking at or studying the environmental impact very, very closely, and making sure that we are taking into account, flooding issues. And I can give you an anecdote of this from West Ashley. I live in West Ashley, and used to be that living in West Ashley, I moved to West Ashley so I wouldn't have to worry about getting my car flooded downtown. Fortunately, in my part of West Ashley, that's not a problem, but in many other parts of West Ashley, that's becoming a major concern. Shadow Moss flooded again.
Right.
Church Creek flooded again. Crosstown Church, third year in a row.
Yeah.
Flooded again. Those poor people.
Yeah.
They're resilient. They rebuild. They come back stronger. But those poor people. But now there's new apartment complexes going up on Sam Rittenberg Boulevard. Right. There's a lot of work going on there. And now you have Ashley River Road near Sam Rittenberg Boulevard, and that goes underwater. I haven't seen it become impassable yet, but it's only a matter of time. So we've got to be really careful about, because concrete just does not take water like soil.
Yes, true.
Just the basics of solubility, and so we've got to be very careful about, how we're doing this. I would love to see a plan where we, explicitly preserve pieces of nature. I know Hilton Head Island, they have, if you've been down there, you drive on Hilton Head Island, and you're going to see stakes in the ground that say the 7.2 acres or however much land preserved by the town of Hilton Head Island.
Right.
And it's all nature, it's all green space. So they have done a good job of trying to maintain that balance. And I'm sure that our local officials are looking at something like that. I would hope so. but it's something that we should really consider.
Indeed. You're so passionate about weather, especially here in Charleston. We thank you for your service on Twitter.
Thank you.
The public service that you do. Tell me this. How did Jared Smith meet Charleston weather?
When I was 4, I moved here. I was born in San Diego, where there is no weather. And I moved here, and there was weather. And it was, quite frankly, frightening. The sky would do things that I wasn't expecting the sky to do. It was making noises and getting windy, and it's like, quite frankly, it was a little alarming for me at 4 or 5 years old. So I was like, okay, well, let me start learning about it.
Right.
And time goes on. You confront. Sometimes it takes confronting fears to learn things. I can't point to any one watershed event that made me interested in weather. It just was. I think it was just moving from the relative lack of weather, where the Weather Channel co-founder literally retired to do television weather in San Diego. John Coleman,
right?
Yeah, and he's on KUSI. I don't know if he's still working on it out there or not, but last time I was there, he was there. But so to Charleston, which is just a fantastic place for all types of weather, fantastic place to forecast. Along the way, I'm a professional software developer by trade, and so I really enjoy that part too. And being able to fuse weather and media, which is where my college background is at CFC,
yes.
And weather, I'm able to bring all these passions together, and it just works. And the nice thing is that I can run something that's useful to people and automate my way around it strategically. And so that part's just really fun. And so in 2007, 2008, I started experimenting with Twitter, and I would do these little live streams of radar as much as I did on Periscope during the event. Streaming's gotten so much better. Since 2008, when I was using a program called Minicam, which was designed to let you put like palm trees in the background, but instead I was using it to project the radar over webcam using Ustream back in the day, and I was like, okay, this is pretty cool. This might turn into something. And I was like, okay, well, Twitter's got this great interface that lets you automate against it, and so I fired up an account, CHSWX. It was early days, Charleston weather, CHS weather, CHSWX. And early days, started that hashtag started around the same time. It's like, okay, so let me just grab, this just makes sense. Make this maybe an aggregator for the hashtag. The original incarnation was me getting alerts on my BlackBerry from Weather Underground, just to give a general idea of how long ago that was at this point. And I would go to my BlackBerry and I would text 40404 and be like, hey, there's a warning, anywhere in the Tri-County area. So the idea was that, okay, so traditional television DMAs, not just Berkeley, Charleston, Dorchester, but you also Colleton, sometimes Georgetown, Williamsburg, Orangeburg. And you would often see situations where people would get angry at the television stations because they were breaking in for sports. They would break in the middle of sports for something in Orangeburg. And it's like, well, what the heck? And it's like, okay, so now we have this technology where we can put out very highly targeted, hyperlocal was the big word in 2008.
Yes.
And we can put out highly targeted information. And so like, okay, so we're going to do Berkeley, Charleston, Dorchester, because when I set that up, and I was like, okay, this is going to be my territory, because it's not just downtown, it's not just West Ashley, it's not just Mount Pleasant. I mean, there's people go spread far and wide, and that's never been more important now. Now that Boeing is going, now that Boeing is here, and Volvo is going in, and so the commutes are getting longer, and also it's just a good way to be like, okay, weather systems typically move west to east, and so it just makes sense that I'm going to have my highest concentration of following at the coast. That's just demographics determine that. But it's good to have a heads up, and so having Berkeley, Charleston, and Dorchester in there, and I've got plenty of people all over the Tri-County who follow and give reports and everything, and that's very helpful. So so we're going to continue to do that, and I don't know, it just worked out, and I guess I just out random one day, just people started tweeting me out of the blue with reports of weather. Wow. And it's like, thanks. And this was before the official retweet function, so you had to copy and paste the tweet, RT, the name, back in the old days here.
Oh, God.
Throwback, it's going to throw that back a little bit to 2009 Twitter. With the manual retweet. And, it just kind of blew up.
Wow.
And, and we had a couple events, and I moved around a bit. I was working at the time for an online media company, Read Write Web. They were a technology blog, and so we moved around a little bit. I was living in Hilton Head doing this for a while. I was living in Northern Virginia for a little while doing this, so I was still like dialed in and everything. And my wife didn't understand it, and she was like, "We're in Virginia. Why do you care?" And it's like I just have this thing, and it's just working. People are using it, so I just got to keep going.
Right.
Moved back to Charleston in 2012. Took a job here at Boomtown. They brought me back, which was great, and then and things have just taken off from there. Twitter is here to stay. It was looking a little touch and go for a while, but it is the backbone of media.
Sure.
It's why it's the first place that I continue to cultivate.
Right.
Working on web properties, working on Facebook. Facebook took off in a big way during this event. I don't like Facebook for weather.
Ooh.
Facebook will show you a lot of old weather things, and so everything that I do is predicated on timeliness. Because again, it's like back in the day, Twitter asked you the question, "What are you doing?"
Right.
And it's a very immediate medium, and it actually pains me to see Twitter like, "Oh, by the way, this is what you missed," or "This is a tweet that somebody liked," like right in the middle of your chronological order. And social networks are doing a very poor job of just respecting chronology.
Right.
And there may be reasons that I get it. They want to surface things that are of high value to people, but.
Sure.
And maybe the fact that there was a tornado warning 6 hours ago or so, but when I see people retweeting these old warnings, it's like, "Hi there, this is old.
Right.
A lot of people liked it at the time because it was useful. I am hesitant to go back and delete old things because I think it does give a good record of the event. I think having the historical record of the event and how it went down is very important.
Sure.
I think a lot can be gleaned from that. With the benefit of hindsight and a little less adrenaline and a little less caffeine, we can go back and analyze, the things that happened and try and figure out, what we can do better, what we do right. And so I'm a big fan of that historical record too. But yeah, no, it's been going on. Started in April 2008, so it'll be 10 years next year.
Wow.
Had a lot more hair then.
Yeah.
And a lot more hair, a lot fewer wrinkles, and I got no reason to stop. So
Don't.
we're gonna keep going.
You should. You should.
Thanks, man.
Well, Jared Smith, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this.
Absolutely, Quintin. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.